You're gonna die someday, and the people who love you are gonna have to figure out what to do with your body. They'll call a funeral home, they'll pick a casket, they'll choose flowers, they'll stand in a room and say goodbye to something that used to be you, and the whole thing will feel ancient, like a ritual that has always existed, that has always looked roughly like this. But here's what nobody ever stops to ask. What did humans do before any of that existed? Before funeral homes, before caskets, before organized religion told people what death meant and what to do about it? Go back far enough. 100,000 years, 200,000 years, and you're looking at a small group of people standing over a body with no instructions, no framework, no one to call, just a person who was alive yesterday and isn't anymore. What did they actually do? The answer starts where you'd expect, and then it goes somewhere that will make you deeply uncomfortable. And by the time you understand why they did what they did, you won't be uncomfortable anymore. You'll recognize it. The first thing to understand is what death actually meant in that world. Not emotionally, practically. When someone died in a prehistoric group, the group lost something it could not replace. Not just a person, a library. Someone who had spent 40 years learning exactly where the water sources dried up in summer. Someone who knew which plants reduced fever and which ones killed you. Someone whose entire life's worth of knowledge lived only inside their head, and was now gone forever, in an instant, with no warning and no backup. There were no books, no records, no way to store any of it. Everything that person knew vanished the moment they stopped breathing. Death wasn't just grief. It was a catastrophic, irreversible loss of information the group needed to survive. And yet, and this is where it starts getting extraordinary, they didn't treat the dead as nothing. They didn't leave bodies where they fell and move on. Something in the human brain, even 100,000 years ago, refused to do that. The oldest evidence of deliberate human burial comes from Border Cave in South Africa. Roughly 80,000 years ago, someone carried the body of an infant to a specific location, dug a small hole, placed the child inside, and laid a perforated shell next to the body. A piece of jewelry, something that meant something. That act required more effort than leaving the body. It served no survival purpose. It was done anyway. And when you find that same pattern, bodies deliberately positioned, pigment applied to skin, objects placed with care, at sites separated by thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years, you stop seeing coincidence and start seeing something that was simply part of being human. But the specific practices, what they actually did with the body, is where it gets genuinely strange. And it starts with the thing most documentaries never tell you. Some of them ate the dead, not out of hunger, not out of desperation, deliberately, ritually, as an act of love. At Gough's cave in England, 14,700-year-old human bones show cut marks placed in exactly the same locations as cut marks on butchered animal bones from the same site. The bones were processed, the marrow was extracted. Skulls were shaped into cups, and these were not the bones of enemies. The evidence shows they belonged to members of the same group, people who were known, people who were loved, processed by the hands of the people who loved them. And before you react to that, hold on, because the 4 people of Papua New Guinea practiced the same thing into the 1960s. Researchers who studied them asked why. The answer was not what anyone expected. They called it a final act of love. To leave a body in the ground was, in their understanding, to abandon the person. To consume them was to carry them forward, to keep them alive inside the people who remained. That reframe should stop you completely, because the act that looks, from the outside, like the most disturbing thing a human being could do, was driven by the exact same impulse that makes you put flowers on a grave. The refusal to let go. The need to keep the person somehow present. The conviction that the people we love deserve more than simply disappearing. They were not monsters. They were grieving people doing the most intimate thing they could imagine. And once you understand that, once that lands, everything else about prehistoric death practices starts making a different kind of sense. Because funerary cannibalism was just one answer to the same impossible question. And the other answers are just as strange, just as human. Some groups practiced sky burial. Bodies were placed on elevated platforms and left for birds, vultures, ravens to consume. Not abandoned, deliberately offered. The bones that remained were collected, kept, brought back to the group. Because in their understanding, the person had not disappeared. They had been transformed. They had become part of the sky. And the bones were proof that the journey had happened. Some groups defleshed the bones deliberately using stone tools, carefully, completely, cleaning the skeleton after death. Then they kept the bones, carried them as the group moved across the landscape, brought them out during ceremonies. The skeleton of a dead person was not a relic of something lost. It was an object with ongoing power, an ongoing relationship. The dead person was still present, just different. And then there are the skulls. Because across prehistoric sites in Europe and the Near East, human skulls were found that had been been modified after death, painted, decorated. In some cases, the jaw was removed and the skull was plastered with clay, the features reconstructed, eyes formed from shells set into the plaster. The face of a dead person rebuilt into something that could be looked at, spoken to, kept in the home. At Ain Ghazal in Jordan, 9,000-year-old plastered skulls were found buried beneath the floors of houses. The people who lived there were living directly above the reconstructed faces of their dead. They were not separating themselves from death. They were keeping it as close as physically possible. Here is what all of it has in common, and this is the part that changes how you see everything. Every single practice, burial with grave goods, funerary cannibalism, sky burial, defleshing, skull keeping, shared one underlying logic. The dead were not gone. Death did not end a person's relationship with the group. It changed it. The dead became ancestors, spirits, sources of power or protection, but they remained present. They remained relevant. They required ongoing attention. This is completely foreign to the way most modern people think about death. We think of it as an ending. The person is gone. What remains is memory and absence. But for prehistoric humans, death was a transition, and the group's job was to manage that transition correctly, because an ancestor who was not properly honored could become dangerous. A person abandoned at death could return as something harmful. The rituals were not just grief. They were active, practical management of a relationship that continued after death. That belief, the dead as ongoing presences who require ongoing care, is the oldest religious idea in human history. It predates every organized religion by tens of thousands of years. It appears on every continent, in every culture, in every era of human existence before the modern period. And it never fully disappeared. Every culture on Earth still has rituals built on the same conviction, that the body matters, that the moment of death requires ceremony, that the people we lose deserve more than simply being left behind. The specific practices changed across 100,000 years. The underlying refusal never moved an inch. Go back to that room. The one with the body. The people who are staying even though there is nothing left to do. Think about the flowers being chosen. The way the body will be dressed before anyone comes to say goodbye. The gathering of everyone who loved them, standing together, doing something that feels necessary even though no one can fully explain why. Every part of that was already happening in a cave 100,000 years ago. Not in a funeral home. On bare ground, by firelight, with no words for what anyone was feeling and no framework telling them what to do next. But the same refusal. The same instinct. The same insistence that this specific, irreplaceable person deserved more than nothing. The practices were sometimes strange, sometimes completely unrecognizable. One of them will disturb you for days after you watch this video. But the thing driving all of them, every single one, was not strange at all. It was love. And the oldest, most human thing there is, sure, the refusal to pretend that the people we lose simply stop mattering the moment they stop breathing. Ancient humans figured that out before they figured out agriculture, writing, or cities, before they figured out almost anything else. Maybe that is what civilization actually is. Not the buildings or the technology or the systems, the decision made over and over again across 100,000 years that the people we love do not get to simply disappear. Everything else was built on top of that. The group standing over that body still had to survive the next morning, still had to hunt, gather, make decisions, hold together under pressure. But who decided? Who led? Who held the group together when everything was falling apart? And what happened when that person was gone too? That's the next video.